Hello to our viewers from the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, India, South Africa, Philippines, Australia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and other parts of the world. We welcome you all to our Super Saturdays live talk. It is the mission of Nexadose to add value to our viewers and continually provide substantial content by holding interviews with guest speakers who are experienced and experts in their field. Thanks for hopping in for today's live session, and please let us know where you're watching us from by dropping your comments on the comment section below. Our guest speaker today is the firstborn in a family of 7 children who not only survived but thrived during the apartheid era in South Africa. Her leadership skills and resilience, as well as her intelligence, brought her to senior executive roles in the corporate world. She is proud to have served on some of the largest projects for the public broadcaster, like the Soccer World Cup held in South Africa in 2010, which she views as one of the highlights of her career. After 30 years of working in the media industry, she left the corporate world behind and started her own consultancy firm, where she brings in her 30 years of experience to help business owners and individuals carve a path to their success. The author of the book Sacred Simplicity and a mother of 2, it is an honor to have her on board today for our Super Saturday show. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Verona Durwaka. Good morning, Verona from Dubai.
Good morning from South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yeah, so I've read your profile and there are a lot of things that I can potentially ask you. And I know that there are so many things that we can learn from you. However, I created a context in our today's conversation so we will know where we're going. You're a leader yourself, and I believe that a path for you is, or direction for you is important. So let's revolve our conversation around in the context of leadership and resiliency, because I believe you are a great leader. Now, here's my first question to you. What are the most important values you demonstrate as a leader?
Well, people talk about resilience and commitment and discipline, and all those things are extremely important as a leader. And you have to lead by example. So first of all, you can't give what you don't have. So deep within you, you have to believe in certain things, whether it's your values, your belief system. And that is what shines through in any situation that you find yourself in as a leader.
Wow. That is very deep, because you know what? A lot of people think they are leaders just because they are in a leadership position. Do you agree? But they are not really leaders. They are managers. They are team managers and not team leaders.
Absolutely. As a leader, you have to first put yourself through the pain. So you can't empathize with somebody if they're experiencing a certain problem or challenge in the business or in their own life, if you yourself don't understand how to deal with these things. So being a human being is the most important thing as a leader. It's not about what title you have. It is not about what qualifications you have or what role you have. That is just a title. It is about first having a heart. And for me, that's always been the key thing, is being a human being, feeling for the person, even when they've messed up, because everybody does. We all start somewhere, we all mess up somewhere along the line. And it's really about how you then address whatever challenge there is. So leadership is really about being able to be a person first, being the flesh and blood that you are first, before you become all of the academic things that we soon become once we are given these fancy titles, as we call them.
You know what, Verona, we just started our interview, but with the words that came out from your mouth, I could really feel that you are caring, and you do care for your people more than your position. And it shows, even it shows that the words that you use, that means it's in your heart. And with that, I really want to learn more from you in today's session, because not only am I, building a different organization, an organization myself, and I believe that I need to hone this part of me. how it is to be a leader. Now, how can a leader fail? Can you please give an example? You've been in the media industry for 30 years, and I believe that mistakes are part of our success story, right? So, as a leader and not just a team player, how when can you say you have failed as a leader?
Oh, I failed many times. And I mean, today I sit as somebody that has been in the business or in the business world for a long time. And, I get asked for advice and stuff very often, but I too started out as a young person. I too made many mistakes and I too have learned along the way. So one of the big things for me has always been, so I started out in finance and in the finance world, people always perceive you to be quite arrogant and not caring, and because you kind of go by the book and everything has to be done with rules and regulations. So the perception that people have of you is that, oh, you don't care, you're not interested in understanding their problem. So for me, I've had to learn that it is not about what you say, it's about how you say it. So if somebody comes to you with an issue or you find that there's an error on something, it's not about accusing them or looking down on them. It's about, I picked this thing up. There's a little problem here. Can we talk about it? And it is about how you then connect with them from a heart space. So for me in the beginning, I think I was very academic and probably very cold because things had to be done in a certain way and it had to be done right. There are rules to follow, and that's just how it works. However, as you grow older, you learn that when you're dealing with people, you first have to understand the person you're dealing with, not the problem. Like they say, you play the ball, not the person, you know. And so failing for me has been in many areas. One, like I say, in terms of how I approach problem solving. Two, in terms of how to deal with any issues that a person might have. So, for example, if a person is continuously late to work or a person is not performing like they should, those are the hardest things in business is dealing with people. It's not about dealing with business issues. Those are easy to deal with, in my opinion. Dealing with the human being is where the issues are. And once you start to resonate and you learn how to resonate with people, everything else becomes easier. And that's kind of how I rose into corporate leadership. And to this day, people still say to me, but for those of us that have known you since you were a young lady and now you're an old woman, you've not changed. You're just as naughty as you used to be. You still talk the same nonsense you used to talk, and you still treat everybody in exactly the same way. And it's those things that you learn along the way. That don't think that just because you have a title and you're now placed in executive management or you're on the board or you're the CEO, because I've done all of those things. That suddenly when you meet somebody in the lift that you've known for a long time, you're kind of like, oh, hello, or you just stay quiet. You're still the same person. Nothing's changed within yourself. So please, people, whatever you do, do not change. Do not change who you are at a DNA level, deep down within ourselves. We must remain true to who we are, or else the universe will teach you who you are.
You know what, Verona? I feel like I want to stop this interview and I'll just meditate on your word because listening to you right now, I feel a little bit teary eyed. I'm sorry, I'm really emotional because um, your words really have power. I mean, there was a point in my life where I kind of changed a little bit. And then you're right, so life taught me really hard, and I have to remind myself of who I was. And sometimes, the titles, the big titles, could deceive us or change our character if we are not careful. But listening to you right now, there's so much, more than the words that you say. It's actually the emotion and the energy behind your words. And that means these words are not read from the book, but they come from real experience. And you are really refined through the fire. That's how I feel you. I've talked to, I have friends who are CEOs, they're running their own business. Yes, that's true. So when I talk to them, sometimes I feel like they are too logical and too rational and too structured, and you have to do this and do that. So you have to be prim and proper all the time. And it makes me feel like I'm always tiptoeing, But listening to you, you've been through all these. You were right now. You are your own CEO of your own company, and you were a CEO of a very big organization. But listening to you, I feel like I'm talking to a human being and not with this big title of CEO or business owner stuff, which is very, very amazing. And with that, I really admire you. So let me proceed to the next question before I express, my admiration of how you have become through all these years. How do you get others to accept your ideas? You know that disagreements are normal, and particularly when the person wants something and you want something else, and sometimes they just don't want the suggestion that you are putting forth or putting forward. So how do you get others to accept your ideas in a positive way? Of course, acceptance.
Well, first of all, there's not such a thing as getting others to accept anything. You know, life is a negotiation. Everything in life is a discussion, and the job you have as a leader is to help the other person to be able to understand and see where you're coming from. Equally, your job as a leader to see where they're coming from. So this is not a top down, I am telling you. It is a discussion, and it is about you as the leader being able to help the other person to understand the logic of where you're coming from. And sometimes they might have a better suggestion. So you then have to listen to them. So it's really not about telling anybody anything. It's always a discussion. It is always two parties coming to an agreement. And for me, it's really been a journey into that space of starting out in junior management, going into senior management, going into executive roles, where you start to understand how human beings think and how they feel. So, and the more important part is how they feel. So even if you are telling them something, there's a strategic board meeting that's happened, or whichever higher power has decided that this is what the organization now needs to do. It's not about you standing up there as a leader and saying, oh, well, you will do this and it has to be done like this. You can tell them that. It's about how you say it. It's about how the words come out of your mouth. And it's about how you make them feel when you're saying that, so that they're not feeling as though you're instructing them, but that you're sharing with them, and that whatever it is that they need to be doing, they want to do with love, because it's important for the organization that we all work in. And it's for the greater good of the organization, not for me as an individual.
Wow, that is so much to digest. I think I have to watch this replay. You know what? I have prepared here a set of questions, but then I don't want to miss the questions posted by our viewers. So if you allow me, I'd like to. Okay, I'd like to say good morning to Fazila and Conaid. Conan asked this question: How someone, because this is related to your previous answer, how can someone know who really he or she is at at the DNA level?
Well, there are various ways. So there's academic ways, which we all know, where we can do certain personality tests and psychometric evaluations. However, as I've learned and grown through the years, and again, this has been a journey, and it's not something that's happened overnight. And in fact, I learn every day. And at my age, I still continue to do courses and learn new things all the time. And one of the things that I've learned literally in the past couple of years has been around going deeper into oneself. So through meditation, meditation I've done for a long time, but through meditation, through deeper inner work, where one looks at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, because nobody else can do it for you. Who am I? What am I about? What is important to me? What are the things that make me do something that I really don't want to do? What drives me to do that? Versus what makes me just want to lie in bed and not talk to the world? You know, so understanding who you are is a process, and I think one of the things that if I could go back and take the wisdom that I have now and go back 20 years or 30 years would be, well, I'd start my inner work earlier. I'd start understanding me as a human being and the others around me much quicker, because we have expectations of other people based on who we think we are. Okay, but everyone has their own version of the truth. So who's right?
That's true. That's true. I have a lot to say about it. And I have one question here. Before I'll proceed to the next, I'd like to raise the question by Fazila. Have you had some difficult decisions to make, and how did you deal with it, like adjusting human capital?
Sorry, say that again, the last part.
Have you had some difficult decisions to make, and how did you deal with it, like such as adjusting human capital?
Oh, that I've had many of those decisions to make, and so one of the toughest, and as I say, people management is always the hardest part of any business. So I've had to be part of a few restructuring processes over the years, and making decisions around who gets to stay and who gets to go is probably the hardest thing one ever has to do as a leader. Sometimes you know that there are people that add value to the business, but there's only certain amounts that you can keep in the business. And when you're restructuring, you got to look at what the business requires. And it takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage and a lot of hard work and a lot of blood, sweat, and a lot of tears. So I've cried behind the scenes through many of these processes, because every time it is a person that I have to let go, or there's a conversation that needs to happen, and I know that this person is really good at what they do, and we can't find something else within the organization for them, that's probably the hardest part. Dealing with strategy or implementation of any business goal or whatever it is, that's generally the easier part, and you can change that as you go along. But when you have to deal with people matters, and that it's somebody's bread and butter, and the number of people they have to take care of, those are always the hardest things. But sometimes these tough decisions need to be made, so that if you've got, for example, 200 people in an organization, you can choose to let the organization go down and all 200 lose their jobs, or you can let 50 go and let 150 people keep their jobs. So, it's really very difficult. And I know it seems, when you're in senior management, it seems very easy for the people that's looking up at you. But believe me, it breaks your heart, and it takes a lot of tears behind the scenes before you can do what you need to do. And you need to stand up, be strong, and still say, well, this is what we need to do, and sound like you're really professional about it. But it is very, very hard.
I guess that answers my next question. And yeah, I'm imagining, actually, we're listening to you. I was imagining scenarios in my head, and I imagine fathers and mothers coming to you, and it's their bread and butter. They have to feed kids, but they get terminated. I know it's really tough. So how do you lead through change?
Well, like I say, it's a very hard process, and probably some of the toughest situations that I've been in my career has been through that. And even in the last CEO role that I played, where we had to restructure the business, and it was a smaller business than the one I'd led previously. So it's always harder in a smaller business, because then you start to get to know people individually, and their families or their family history or something like that. So leading through change is a tough process, and it is something that takes a lot of courage from the leader and the leadership team. So if you're the CEO, you need to make sure that your leadership team is strong and resilient through that, and that they They understand why the change is being done. So first of all, it's about engaging everybody and making sure that all people in the value chain understand why what is happening is happening. So if I take an example of the last restructuring I did, the previous CEOs had tried, I think it was 4 or 5 times prior to me getting there, to execute this downsizing and rescaling of the business, because we were going from an analog environment to a digital environment. So there was a whole lot of restructuring to do and reskilling to do. And it had failed, and people wanted to burn down the building and burn down the trucks because it was a production environment. So those are very expensive trucks, et cetera, et cetera. So it never succeeded. And in this instance, all we did differently was from day one, we told the staff exactly what was going on. We kept them in the loop, and we had to answer the difficult questions, because there are people who will sit there and say, but can it not be done differently? Can it not be done like this? And you take every single person's opinion into account, and you make sure that they are heard. You make sure that you take it into account when you're making decisions about a business structure. And from there on, once everyone knows that they've been heard, and that's what worked for me, was in this instance, the leadership team and I sat with all of the different teams, individually and in groups, and made sure that they were heard, and that whatever they had to say was important. And when we made the final decisions, that all of the right people, we had representatives from each of the teams, so they were fully engaged. And I think that's where change becomes easier, is when people are in the loop all the time, that they are respected. Because that's the most important thing, is that they don't feel as though you're some high horse sitting up there telling them what to do. You're listening to them, you're engaging with them, and they feel important and cared for along the way.
I think, listening to you, and I just learned one thing. I think one of the greatest skills, I would say one of the great skills, I would say one of the great skills of a leader is a good listener. Because based on what you just said, you don't make decisions after having thought of opinions or ideas, but you actually take time to take into account each person's opinion. You collect, you listen, and then you speak up. That is one thing that I believe not just leaders, but everyone should learn and practice listening with empathy. Because this is we are trained to speak, but we are not trained to listen with empathy. And that's very enlightening, Verona. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Before I'll proceed to the next question, I'd like to read one comment from Omar Sharif. He is the co-founder as well of Nexadose, together with Kaunain. Very impressive. This is according to him. I can relate with you so much you have to say. I personally have always believed that one of the important pillars of good leadership is first who and then what. Would love to have your wisdom on that one too, if you could elaborate.
So you're talking about it's first who and then what?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So absolutely. I mean, it is always about the who, the human beings, the hearts, the flesh and blood that is part of any organization. The what's become then the strategies around that. It becomes the wording by those hearts. Because if those hearts don't believe in what you're trying to do, in this vision that you have for this business, in the mission that it needs to accomplish, then the what does not work.
Okay.
And in fact, you can go one step further. It's about the why. Why do we do what we do? Why is this business in existence? What value are we adding to our clients and our customers and the world at large? What is the greater good that we're trying to achieve? So that why is then the first step. And then it becomes, okay, who is now part of this journey and what do we need to do to execute and to get to this why, this big thing that we are here and we dream about achieving, that we may never actually achieve, but we start out from step one, because we always want to go from step 1 to 100, but you got to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So once you've got the people's hearts in the right place, and you've got that energy that buys into this why, this big thing that you're here to achieve, it becomes much easier for the what to take place. Because then it's about, here's the 20 or 100 or 200 things that we need to do. And if the buy-in is there and people are excited and they want to be part of this journey, it becomes very easy to execute, versus you've got people dragging their feet and their energy is down and they're like, oh my God, I don't even know why I'm here. I need money, so that's why I have to be in this company. It's a very different energy from, I'm excited to do this and I believe in why I'm in this organization, and when you start feeling, and I often point to the heart, because for me, a lot of what I do is heart space. And it doesn't matter whether you're a CEO of a multinational or a CEO of a little company or a managing director, or whether you're sweeping the floor. If you're doing something with your whole heart, it is so easy to be successful at it. We chase money, we chase cars, we chase material things, and we forget that in the end, it's about how we feel. Number one.
Great. It's what truly satisfies us to the deepest core. Verona, that was very, and those indeed, I would say that's very deep. I have to go back to that. You start with who and then why before the what. It's the who, right? This is
the why first.
I mean, the why first and then the who and then the what. Okay, that's 3 dimensions. I feel like now proceeding to my questions, because the viewers now are so engaged with the show that they have posted their comments as well as their questions. So let me read one comment first before I'll veer off from my own interest for you, because I really want to learn more from you as a leader. According to Nasreen, she's watching from Turkey. So much of what Verona has spoken about cuts across industries and professions, yet so few leaders are willing to introspect this. Would be interested to know what makes a proactive leader as opposed to one that cannot or will not change. What qualities do they possess?
Well, this is where that deep inner work comes in. And as I say, I wish that I could go back a good couple of years and start doing more inner work earlier. So, as leaders, we become arrogant, and, we believe that, we are so important, and our ego trip is what guides us in our daily lives. And you find that, and I mean, this happened to me personally, by the way. So it's not like I was immune to it either. So as you said earlier, Janessa, same thing happens where you get into these senior roles and suddenly you feel that your feet is not on the ground anymore. You're so important. And, the whole world out there doesn't exist because you're now this fancy, whoever you think you are, walking the red carpets and, it being fancy parties and all of that. And you forget that somewhere along the line, like I said earlier, the universe will call you back to the ground, because if your feet will leave the ground, make no mistake, that somewhere along the line, you'll find the ground again. And it might be very, very painful. So for me, in that short space of time where I think I personally had my feet leave the ground and found myself floating in a space that I really did not resonate with. And personally, I got sick. I got really sick. I got vertigo, which was something that literally I lost my balance. Got up one morning, or tried to get up one morning, and I couldn't get out of my bed. And I was like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? So you get brought back to where you belong very quickly. So it is really about understanding that deep inside you, you are X person. And yes, we all tend to, as leaders, or once we get into senior roles, and you'll see it with politicians, and I worked in very political environments as well, that you get sucked into this other world where you become somebody that you are not. Okay. And the sooner you start to look within yourself, and like I say, sometimes you become sick, sometimes you lose your job, sometimes somebody will just treat you badly, but the universe always finds ways to bring you back to the ground. And once that humility starts to kick in, you then start to understand that actually I've done something wrong and I need to change myself. So looking within you is critical at all times.
Very powerful. You know what's my take on that, Verona? Yeah, it's the same point, but I'll say it in a different way. I've learned also in life that even before we reach the executive level, or you before you earn these big titles, it's very important that we continuously, I would say, when I say continuously, on a daily basis, practice the habit of self introspection. So this is doing the inner work. We contemplate, we meditate, and we keep on asking ourselves, have I hurt someone with my words, with my behavior? How am I going to improve myself? And I believe that character building is prerequisite. I would say, important is an understatement for me. It's prerequisite for success. Because once we don't have the character to hold that success, then that success itself will burn us to the ground. So this character actually is like a vessel. It holds whatever that will be put in that vessel. This vessel is your character. And if our character is strong enough, we know who we are from the inside. You know your intentions and your values, your convictions, then no matter how people may misjudge you, your feet is still on the ground. And most of all, I believe that part of our self introspection is always acknowledging the one who who is giving, or who gives us all of this, our creator, because he's the one who gives and he's the one who takes away. The moment we forget that, we are bestowed with these blessings and we should be good stewards of what is bestowed upon us, then he will also take that away from us. So because much is given, much is also required. But with the little that we have, if we are not good stewards, that little will be taken away from us.
Absolutely, well said. And I think that, and that's why I refer to the universe, because each of us has our own beliefs around, where the higher powers come from. And again, it is the conditioning that we have from very young that sits in the subconscious mind that controls us. And the more we allow this conditioning and this wiring as we have been subjected to since we are little, one of the things that I've learned is a lot of who we become starts before we were even born. The whole thing around genetics, and from 0 to 6 years old, once you've been born, all the stuff that happens to you between 0 to 6 years old is what conditions you for most of your life. And as parents, it is critical. Again, one of those things where I wish I'd learned these things earlier, because my own kids are now, quite old or much older. And when you start to look at, if a child is, their basic stuff and their basic DNA is crafted to such an extent between 0 to 6 years old, shouldn't we as parents be living our lives a little bit differently? How, like I said, we chase money, we chase material things. And then we've got these youngsters who we bring into the world and we put them into a school, or, we neglect them, we leave them at home with people, with carers, and we don't kind of wire them in a way that makes them resilient for life. And therefore you're finding the amount of depression and suicide attempts and substance abuse, etc., because we ourselves were subjected to it. We didn't know any differently. And then we bring in another generation and another generation, and it carries on and on.
Mm.
And some of the work that I'm doing currently is around just looking backward into the past generations of individuals, of my clients, and just looking at the common themes that are coming through. So it is so important that we start to understand the responsibility that we carry in the age group that some of us are in,
Yes.
and how we then start to teach the next generation, who will then start to teach the next generation, so that
Yes.
life can start to change, and the cycle that we are currently finding ourselves in can start to change a little bit. Because, I mean, as we know, probably 70% of people in the world are depressed, or they're alcoholics and substance abuse is everywhere. And why is this? It's because we are struggling to cope with who we are, because we've forgotten who we are. We don't know who we are. And that's where this whole thing around what's happening in the subconscious mind and what's happening in your wiring and the conditioning from a young age is so critical, that we need to get those basics right so that the ego doesn't take over later on in life.
You mentioned about resilience. I actually have a question related to resilience, but before asking you that, I'd like to read the comments we have here. According to Conan, he said, you profoundly explained, and this is his takeaway about leadership from you. A good leader leads the people from above them, while a great leader leads the people from within them. And according to Nasreen, she said, tuning into this session has been the best gift I could have given myself this week. Wow, that's a blessing. Verona has just made me realize so much about the lack of drive, motivation within the people that surround me. This itself, Verona, is, very heartwarming. Thank you, Nasreen, for tuning in, and thanks so much for putting in your comments. So let's go back to resilience. We've talked about people who are struggling with depression. I experienced that actually, Verona, last year. I could not sleep. And there are people who could not accept failure. They think it's the end of the world for them. Now, this question is for you, and I hope you can give us an example so that our viewers can, see it as something very personal, and it's something not bookish, something that you didn't hear from people, or something that you didn't read from the book. What has been your greatest failure? You would say, this is my greatest failure. All of us have this sort of great failure, right? And how did you feel when you were in that situation? That's the second question. That's the follow-up question, sorry. How did you cope with it? And the third is, do you think this has changed you as a person? And which area in your life has been changed because of that quote unquote failure? I hope you got all my 4 questions. Or do you want me to repeat that?
No, it's fine. So first of all, I was just paging through. So this is the book that you referred to. And chapter 1 is resilience.
Wow.
Okay. And, so resilience for me has come about in a number of ways, but resilience doesn't come from good things. It comes from tough times. It comes from when you fall really, really hard, and those lessons come through, and it breaks your heart in such a way that you think at some points you cannot manage to deal with this pain that is in your heart. So probably for me, if I look at, well, what might be the most or the biggest thing that I felt at, probably was not having enough time allocated to my kids. And I think for me, it was the number of hours that I spent at work. So I'd leave home early morning, I'd get back home sometimes at midnight. I'd be traveling all the time. And before I knew it, my children were 15, 16 years old. And this is where I believe that it's probably my biggest failure. I think from a corporate point of view, yes, I've had some failures in that, but they're not some things that have kind of personally affected me as much as not being there for my kids. And I think the upshot of that obviously was that I could buy them really cool stuff, and I was traveling everywhere, so they had stuff that other kids didn't have, and all of that. And this is the other thing that I've learned, is that it's nice to have those things, but it's not the same as having your mom there when you want to cry. And I remember my son, especially, because I've got a son and a daughter, and my son would when I'd call home. And so he'd always be crying, I want my mommy, I want my mommy, I want my mommy. And then when I'd call, he wouldn't want to speak to me, because I'd left him and once again, and I'd gone, and I was somewhere in the world, So for me, I think that in chasing your own dreams as a woman, as a gentleman, it's Women's Month here in South Africa, and so we as women, we have lots of workshops, and we're talking about all these challenges that women experience and how we can be better at them and all of that. But for me, it's really about, when you recognize that you are failing at something, do something about it at that point, because the heartbreak that comes out of it later, and you can't fix something 10 years later. I can't go back and say, oh, well, I wasn't there for my kids, and so now I can make that time up. What I have done since then is, I've left the corporate world. I now spend much more, and of course, COVID has helped enormously with keeping us at home. So I do most of my work on Zoom or at home. I have a little office at home now, and when you realize that you can't buy back time.
Yes.
Because you think you can. When you're in in the greater scheme of things, when you're busy in that flurry of activity of, my career is doing really great, and I'm going to work harder, and I'm going to do so much more for this company. On the day when you're lying down in your bed and unable to get up, and you're really sick, none of those people are going to be there. The only people standing at my bedside were my children and their father. Okay. The very people that I put second. All those corporate executives were not standing next to me there wondering what's going to happen next and whether they're going to have a mom or a wife. They're going to get another employee. And that's what we need to remember, is that you're replaceable at work at any time. We always hear they'll send you a bunch of flowers and say goodbye, but your family will bleed forever. And these are the things for me that has been my greatest lessons is, yes, it's great to grow in your career, and it's great, to earn a lot of money and to assume that you've made it. But the pain that comes with that sometimes can break you later on in your life. So if there's young people that's listening in today, just remember that yes, you're driven, you're passionate, and you want to succeed, and you want to show that you can do this and this, and you're going to have this great fancy house and this, or houses, or all these great cars, or this fancy bank balance. But all of that doesn't mean a thing when your health is gone, or when you've got a crying child that you could not be there for, and one day when they grow up, that they're a bad parent because they learned from you, because that's their wiring and that's their conditioning, and you taught them how to do that. And that's your responsibility. So for me, I think, I hope I've answered, all of your questions, but I think that if there's anything that I've learned from this, is that, yes, it's great to have the drive, but also be responsible, because there are so many other lives that you impact along the way.
Wow, very powerful, Verona. You're right. We cannot turn back time, so we cannot buy back time. There was a point in my life when I would cry almost every night. When I came to Dubai, it was different. I could say that I was somehow soaring in my career, but it's painful when I cannot be there for my kids when they need me. I could not hug them. And, when my daughter would tell me, Mom, how I wish you're just here beside me and hug me because I don't feel good right now. The pain is double, because you know that You can understand your kids more than anyone else. And what my turning point was when my second child told me, "Mom, we've lost 5 years already. We are teenagers now. How many years are we going to lose? You staying in Dubai and we're here in the Philippines." And thanks to COVID, it worked for us. I decided to bring my kids here, and it really changed. It changed my emotional state, and I would say, much happier now. And I realize what's more important to me. Is it really my career or my family? Both are important, but there should be, anyway, we'll get back. We'll answer that question talking about balance, family, and kids. But going back to your question, yes, it's this feeling of urgency. There's a sense of urgency to be with our kids during that window of opportunity while they are still with us. Because when the time comes, for them to chase their own dreams, then they're it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be challenging for us to spend time together because they may be in another country by the time. So yeah, thanks for that, Verona. I believe that our viewers now can, learn something very deep from you because they're also parents and they are pursuing their dreams as well. They have a career to take care of. Yeah, let me still let's talk about resilience, sorry. um in your first chapter, I didn't even know that the first chapter of your book talks about resilience. So just give us a bird's eye view or a hint, or a glimpse of that chapter. How does a person become resilient?
Well, I'll talk about what I've written in the book so that it makes some sense. So when I was 14, our house burnt down, and we lived in a very rural part of South Africa. And as you mentioned earlier, it was apartheid in South Africa, and what that meant was there was racial segregation. So all of the different races lived in very specific areas. So we weren't very well off, and the little that we had suddenly just overnight, well, one afternoon, just lost everything. And all we had was what we were wearing, just the clothes that we had on. And I remember that from then on, the way people would treat us, they'd laugh, and we'd be, kind of the joke everywhere we went, because it was like, oh yeah, now they're sharing clothes and they're wearing the same things over and over again. And as much as like the whole community was not kind of wealthy, you still felt as though you were less than, And I think my parents had a huge part in playing the role that they did in our lives to say, well, actually, you don't have to care what other people think. Yes, we don't have a lot from a material point of view, but we were still, all of us that were at school, there were 7 of us. And now there's 6 because my one brother passed away due to a car accident. But at that point, when you got nothing and you're a youngster and everybody's laughing at you, you don't understand, and my parents would say to us, but you still have each other and we still have our lives, And I think for me, at that point, I didn't care too much about that, because it was kind of like, oh, well, yeah, that doesn't solve my problem. People are still laughing at me. But in hindsight, I'm just grateful that through that fire, which was caused by another family member because of, family rivalry at the time, I just learned that let's be grateful that none of us were injured, that none of us were at home at the time. And later on, as I got through school, and those days there were no photocopiers and computers and stuff like we have today. So you had to go and rewrite all my school books, all of us that were at school, all our school books were burnt down. So we had to go and rewrite all our notes for school. So I got people in my school to help, and other people as well to just help to copy each of the subjects. And at the end of that year, I still came in the top 3 in the class.
Wow.
And for me, that little win, which I didn't kind of understand at that point in time, but as I grew older, was kind of like, if I could get through that, and still, I was a sports captain at the school that year, and my mom had gone and bought me all of these nice outfits and that, so that, because I was the leader of the pack. And all of that burnt down like a week before, the actual event. So you start out with nothing, and then you learn that no matter what, if you fight and if you have a spirit of, I can do this no matter what, and you know what you want in life, because what I knew was that I didn't want. So you must not, in life, you must first know what you don't want before you can know what you do want. So I knew that where I was at was what I didn't want. I didn't want to be in that kind of situation. And when you grow up in an environment like that, you don't really understand what the rest of the world is about. And in those days, being in Europe or in America or whatever was kind of this far away world that you didn't understand. Because you're this little kid in a rural community in South Africa, somewhere in the north part of South Africa. And I remember as I grew up and started to understand more and more of the world, my parents just kept pushing and making sure that school was very important. And, my mom, still my role model to this day, who had very little education, but what she knew was that her kids would have everything that she could afford, and she would work hard to make sure that we went to school. We weren't allowed to stay at home. You had to go to school, even if it was raining and the floods were wherever. So what I talk about in the book is exactly that. There were times where there were floods, and we'd walk with the water up to here, and we'd hold each other through the river to get to school. Yes, it's crazy, but it's true. And then we'd walk the way back, or we'd find an alternative route to walk back home if the river was too raging or the water was too raging. So it's crazy stuff. But that's where resilience comes from.
You've been through this.
Yes.
Wow, I am having goosebumps right now. When something is, look what have you become. You have achieved. You really reached the pinnacle of success. But if we look back and we look at your story, I'm sure a lot of people will be inspired. And if they read that book, they know where you're coming from. There's a lot of things that they can not just learn, but they can put into their system. They can rewire their thinking. And I can't, while you were speaking, Verona, I was just, because when it's something very situational, I kind of imagine it in my head. I could see the rivers, the current of the river, and you have to cross. It's, wow, this is mind blowing, Verona. I can't believe really you've been through this. I come from the city, so I could not relate to the story, but I could see this on YouTube, on social media, how difficult it is for children to go to school and have to cross rivers and hike for I would say for how many kilometers, but they made it. Wow.
7 to 9 kilometers a day, to and fro.
Huge respect, Verona. Huge respect, because I didn't have this. Wow. I hope our viewers are learning, are inspired by Verona's story right now. Let me read a comment from Tarun Tiwari. He's watching from India. Awesome, one of the best source of learning in my groups. I also would like to acknowledge Lucia Arbas. Okay, and we're almost done. It's like time passed. It's almost an hour online with you, Verona, but I didn't even feel it because the conversation is so interesting and so enriching that I myself just would like to listen to you speak. There's so much in your life. Now, can you answer this very briefly? I'll throw two questions to you related to you being, questions about parenting or being a mother. So you can give me a crisp and on the point answer. What tips can you give to working mothers who are struggling to establish work-life balance? And how do you translate your being a leader to your children?
Okay, so I think that there's really no such thing as a balance. Whether we like it or not, we leave our kids at home and we go to work and we spend a lot of hours at work. And by the time we come back, we're mostly tired, unless now you're working from home, and sometimes you're more tired working from home. So you have to make time, and there has to be quality time, because people believe in oh, but I'm going to spend a lot of time. It's not about how much time. It's about the quality of time you spend with your kids and what you're teaching them during that time. Because it doesn't help to be there all the time and then you're shouting and screaming at them because they're not doing what you want or what you're telling them to do. Okay. So rather have lesser time, but structure the time in a way that is beneficial to the children. That's my view. I don't believe in spending all day, every day, and then half the time you're in negative spaces anyway. So rather have good time, lesser time, but have quality structured time. And the second question was around how
do you transfer being a leader to your children?
So I think one of the greatest gifts for me from my children has been them saying to me that I'm their role model. I think there is no greater accolade that a parent can have than that. It doesn't, for me, it's just kind of when a child tells their mother, I want to be, because I asked my son the one day, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be you. And I was like, oh my word, So for me, it's a daily thing. It's a daily dose. It is about how you execute your heart to them. Am I making you cry? Oh my word.
Because I'm also a mom and I have 3 kids. It's tough, you raise them, you have work, and you want to give the best to your kids, but you don't have all the time, and you have to meet people and you have to leave your kids. So yeah, for me, it's so real talk.
Absolutely. And it's now you're making me cry here. Now
sorry for that. And to our viewers, it's just that there's so much in my life, in my heart, and I need this Verona more than Nexadose, more than a viewers. I need to hear this from you.
Well, you see, this is the thing: there's nothing wrong with being open and teary-eyed and vulnerable in front of other people, and we think that as women and as men in business that we need to be superhuman. We need to be everybody's superhero, and we're not. We're also just a person trying to cope with everyday life. And you can't be a super mom and a super business person and a super this and a super wife and a super everything. You can be a little bit of everything at any given point in time. So when you do it, and that's why I say it's about the quality at that time. So when you're with your kids, be the best mom that you can be. When you're with your work, be the best that you can be at that. When you're with your partner, be the best you can be at that. And those are nuggets in different points in time. You can't be 100% at everything in all categories at the same time. You can't. It just doesn't work. So take little bits and excel at those little bits. And that's all you can do. And yes, when you need to cry, cry. And when you need to smile, do that too. It's okay to be human.
That's true. All right. So I believe we really have a very interesting conversation this morning. In Fasila said, your story is so touching. Yes, I second that. Before we end this talk, I'd like you to tell us more about your book. It's entitled Sacred Simplicity. What inspired you to have this title? What made you have this phrase, Sacred Simplicity, as the title of your book? And what can we expect to learn from this book?
Okay, so as the title says, it's about the simple things in life. It's about, we always think that life has to be complicated and life has to be, I don't know, for me, it's, we make everything into something it's not. So keep things simple, keep things basic, just love easily. And as I said just now, excel in little things at a given point in time. And the book really speaks about, the different parts of my journey, from walking through flooded waters to and from school, or what I've learned from having our house burnt down, or what I've learned from losing my brother who was 27 years old, or leaving my corporate job, even though I was at the height of success at that point in time, and how hard that was at the time. So that's what the book speaks about. But it's really about, in the end, that if you can smile before you go to bed, and if you know that you've done good for the day, that's enough. So just being simple and keeping things as easy as possible for yourself, because only you complicate you, and only you complicate the things in your life because of what you want. And the simpler you keep it, the easier it becomes.
Wow, Verona, you know what? We still have a few questions on the comment box, but I don't think we have time for that. So probably during your free time, you can just type in your answers. But before I will end this session, I'd like to read the comment from Nasreen. She said, "You are the first person who has told me that it is okay to cry," which I just did earlier, "when you need to, and be a strong, accomplished professional. Usually we are vilified for being human." Verona, thank you so much for your time. And I strongly believe that our viewers really enjoy this enriching session. And I strongly believe that we have learned so much from you today. It is, I would say, I'd like to have you again on Nexadose, Verona, as time permits. And to our friends, I would say thanks for tuning in until the end of the interview. And I am hopeful that you have noted down the takeaway of today's session. Because I don't want you to forget them, they're very important. So that's your dose of learning for today. And we will be more than happy to engage with you in our in our next dose of wisdom interaction. So together we learn, together we grow. Nexadose is always here for you. Once again, thanks, Verona, for responding to this invitation. And before I will finally end the call, do you have a few words for our viewers today?
Well, I think just as a closing, to say that, when a seed is planted in the ground, and if it's an apple seed, it grows an apple tree. So don't forget that whatever seed you are, don't try to become an orange tree when you have apple seed. Remain true to who you are as a human being, and your life will just work out a lot more easily by doing that. I thank you all very, very much for listening to me today.
Thank you, Verona. And thank you once again. Good morning from Dubai.